Aaron Judge hit a line drive, home run to left. A Judgian blast. All rise. Here comes the Judge.
Gotta love John Sterling. First career postseason game. No sweat for Aaron Judge, who ripped a 2-run home run that put the Yankees comfortably ahead of Minnesota. The Yankees move on to play the Indians in the ALDS, which begins on Thursday. We should say hi. Welcome to SI Now. It's Wednesday. I'm Maggie. That is Robin. And along with a win for the Yankees, the American League wild card, well, really had a little bit of everything.
In that duration, you would hope
yeah,
so,
right? In over 4 hours, I hope we get a little bit of everything. I'll tell you what I was most impressed by for the New York Yankees. Aside from Severino, who lasted only a third of an inning, I thought that the young team, which really is ahead of schedule in a lot of ways, rose to the occasion here. And I'm talking about obviously Judge, but also Didi Gregorius, also Sanchez, also Greg Bird, seemed unfazed even when that first inning seemed to be going off the rails when Severino was giving up home runs left and right. Now, as good as the young guys were, I'm also going to give a tip of the cap to some of the vets here too, because I think that they are getting lost in the conversation. Brett Gardner hitting a home run, Dave Robertson, who is getting all the attention because he inadvertently hit Gary Sanchez below the belt with a pitch, that's going to get the attention. But these are two guys between Robertson and Gardner who played on that 2009 championship team, and I think that they're showing their leadership.
Well,
here.
Judge is awesome, obviously. To me, the biggest hit was Gregorius. That Yankee shortstop position has a little bit of a penchant for coming through in big moments. But the story was the bullpen, because the Yankees' bullpen may now be as advertised. On paper, they're awesome. They've actually struggled a bit this year. Not the case last night, as the pen salvaged a rough start from Severino and combined to pitch 8 2/3 innings of 1-run ball, making them our adrenaline performer presented by Toyota. Let's go places. Also 13 strikeouts. Green, Robertson, Canely, and Chapman got the job done, meaning they didn't even have to use Betances. If the bullpen is this deep and effective, then, Maggie, I think the Yankees have as good a chance as anyone. So who you got, Yankees or Indians?
This is tight. This is very tight. But I'm actually going to give the edge to the Indians when we're looking at the ALDS. Now, the bullpen, slightly better for Cleveland. ERA a little bit lower. They have the second best ERA in the American League. The Yankees have the third best ERA in the American League. When it goes to starting pitching, though, I think that's where the Indians are going to separate themselves. Remember, you have Danny Salazar and Carlos Carrasco healthy this year. Last year, they went to Game 7 of the World Series, didn't even have two of their best pitchers. I think that makes a bit of difference here, considering their starters have the best ERA in the American League, lowest ERA in the American League. Obviously, both teams have AL MVP candidates, with Judge for the Yankees, Jose Ramirez for the Indians. Yankees slight little more productive at the plate, although I would weigh that a little towards Yankee Stadium. More home runs there, a little bit smaller ballpark. Indians 5-2 against the Yankees this season. I'm going to give the slight edge to the Indians.
I think it's basically a toss-up kind of series, but at least Yankees fans can't complain about the format of the wild card now that they got past that. Speaking of formats, the NBA All-Star Game, well, it's been called a glorified pickup game in the past. Now it's even closer to that, which in my opinion is glorious. The league announced changes to the format where the top vote getter from each conference will serve as a captain, and they will choose up teams from a pool of 24 players, 12 from the East, 12 from the West, with the picks coming regardless of conference. Of course, this can help solve the talent disparity between the conferences and could also create some compelling drama regarding who is picked. We set up a few scenarios to go through how it could go down.
All right, let's get into this.
So let's start with LeBron and Steph, considering they were the leading vote getters a year ago. Let's assume they're the leading vote getters here, and let's say LeBron has the first pick, and he takes Kevin Durant, so Steph Curry cannot. Then where does Steph Curry go?
Okay, I think in real life, what Steph Curry is going to do is he's going to take a teammate, which is going to be so boring. He's going to take Klay Thompson or maybe Draymond Green.
But how could he pick one or over the other? Does that send a bad message to the guy who isn't picked?
No, because I think they're so tight right now that I think that Steph might get it. I think in real life, he would pick a Warrior. I think the most interesting, though, obviously, would be Kyrie, because then you have a little Kyrie versus LeBron, and I think that would be the most interesting of the picks.
Well, you know, Kyrie versus LeBron is going to be great, but then LeBron gets to go, yeah, I didn't have to pick Kyrie.
Yeah, and then, of course, he gets taken off the hook there. Let's go to scenario number 2. We're going to keep LeBron as the Eastern Conference captain because, quite frankly, we can't figure out anyone else who's going to be getting more votes than him in the Eastern Conference. But let's now move the Western Conference captain to be Russell Westbrook, your reigning MVP. Now, we'll go Westbrook picking first here. And I think just like Curry, I think these guys are going to be a little bit boring actually with these picks. I think he's going to go Paul George because it's going to be like solidarity with the new teammate. And I think these guys are going to go along party lines, so to speak. So then LeBron would pick Steph Curry.
Uh-oh. That puts the pressure on Westbrook a little bit right there.
Does Westbrook pick Durant? I mean, I think that Westbrook will go out of his way to not pick Durant.
Kawhi Leonard probably at that point, right?
At that point, something. I mean, I wonder if he's even going to go like a Jimmy Butler, who's now new to the Western Conference, or I don't know if Paul Millsap's even going to make the team at this point in the Western Conference. Are so stacked. I think he would go totally opposite there, and I think then Durant starts falling, all the way down because, LeBron's going to also feel a lot of pressure to pick a teammate. You don't know if he's going to want to pick a Kevin Love or if Isaiah Thomas is back at that point by some miracle.
Yeah, perhaps the most compelling television would be LeBron against Westbrook to see how far Durant and Kyrie could fall respectively if each of those guys keeps coming up with an opportunity to pick them.
I would set it up almost like, how we keep going back to Aaron Rodgers in the green room as he's dropping in the draft, and then you're seeing Durant just like, oh no, what did I do? Why did I do all
Durant,
that?
you see him setting up other accounts to bash people online, to bash Westbrook online for not picking him.
You just stumble on something really big, though. What if Durant is now going to sway the votes with all of his dummy accounts, which leads us to scenario number 3.
Where he's voting for himself. Scenario number 3, you have LeBron against Durant, as you just mentioned, if Durant's the leading vote getter. Once again, LeBron will pick first. Once again, he'll take Steph Curry. That puts Durant at second. What do you think he does there?
In real life, I think he goes boring and probably picks Draymond Green. Most interesting, though, of course, would be Westbrook. And I feel like that would actually be something that Durant would be more likely to do because I think that, first of all, Durant took a big PR hit this year with the fake accounts and clapping back at all the haters after he's won and become MVP. I think that he would take Westbrook as like a sign like, hey, it's finally over.
That would end it,
You can stop asking me about it. And it would probably be the smarter move. And I think that if Durant is going to be a captain, he might make that move.
And that would be very intriguing to see a scenario where Westbrook and Durant are on the same team and LeBron and Kyrie are on the same team.
Yeah, because then what happens to Kyrie, right? I mean, is LeBron going to take Kyrie, and is that essentially going to squash some of this beef? So that's basically what we're asking. Is the All-Star game going to escalate the beef, or is it going to squash the beef?
Either way, I think it's intriguing, right? Because you have the extra element of this drama, and the games could be more competitive because, sometimes people talk about everybody in the league being friends, but you compete against your friends as hard as anyone sometimes. So I could see them not having that pride in East versus West and having more pride in beating this guy over here who thinks he's the best when I think I'm
going to be totally cynical for a moment. They're going to pick along the shoe company lines. I'm sorry. They're too powerful.
Is there another Under Armour guy?
No, Curry playing alone. Speaking of shoe companies, well, if we're up to LaVar Ball, all 3 of his kids would be starting in the All-Star game, and he would be coaching. Luckily, that can't happen. But LaVar is taking on a slightly different role. School teacher for his youngest, LaMelo, who he is reportedly pulling out of Chino Hills High School, and homeschooling. So here is a sneak peek at LaVar Ball's required reading.
One-on-one, I'm undefeated, never lost.
The same reaction some of you may have had to LaVar Ball's required reading, some people had to the name Brandon Weeden yesterday. Another name, another QB signed before Colin Kaepernick as the Titans signed Weeden with Marcus Mariota dealing with a hamstring issue. Of course, Kaepernick's job status always leads to a larger conversation, one we had with political sports writer and host of the Edge of Sports podcast, Dave Zirin.
Our pleasure now to welcome in Dave Zirin. He's the sports editor of The Nation and host of the Edge of Sports podcast. And Dave, curious to get your thoughts. What was your biggest takeaway from the NFL player protests between week 3 and what we saw in week 4?
The definite big takeaway is that it got smaller, but it also got more focused and more streamlined. In other words, what happened is what I hoped would happen and what needed to happen. I mean, let's remember before Donald Trump's Huntsville comments, the numbers were something like 9 players who were consistently sitting or taking a knee or raising a fist during the anthem, and doing so with very defined political goals. People like Malcolm Jenkins and Michael Bennett were crystal clear about why they were doing what they were doing. Racial inequities in the criminal justice system, bam, full stop. And then it became something else, and something dramatically huge, and something like we've never seen in the history of sports. I mean, up to 180 NFL players, owners, for goodness sakes. I mean, as soon as Jerry Jones took a knee, I swear to you, I thought my brain broke. And of course, the discussion that these original players have so bravely tried to have got completely taken off track. And so I think what you saw this past week was, I think, a real, like, now we know who's serious about this issue, which is what you want. Like when Des Bryant said, yeah, we're not going to be doing anything this week, I was like, good, because you shouldn't do anything if you don't want to do anything. I mean, it shouldn't just be because everybody else is doing it. I mean, you should be able to articulate why you are doing what you're doing. And the players we saw step up or kneel down this week, which was still a substantial number of players, I mean, these are the folks who make up the backbone of this movement.
Now, of course, the comments from Trump may have muddied the purpose of the original protest, but do you think they've changed the perception of the protests overall with the public?
Definitely. And we've seen that in the poll numbers that came out from USA Today and from a polling organization called Seton Hall Sports. USA Today showed 51% of people think the protests are appropriate, which is kind of a remarkable number and a shocking difference from what it was a year ago when Colin Kaepernick was taking a knee, and it was something like 74% of the country thought they were inappropriate. I mean, so that shift is unbelievable, with 68% of the country saying that they thought Donald Trump was acting inappropriate by calling for players to be fired from the position of President of the United States. In addition, the Seton Hall Sports poll said that 84% of the country, and I don't know when we ever get 84% of people to agree on anything anymore, but 84% of the country says that players do have the right to protest during the anthem. And these are statistics and numbers that I don't think you would ever think if one just lived in the social media ecosphere and ecosystem. So it's a great reminder, I think, for all of us that sometimes the online world is not the real world in terms of how people are processing this information.
It is an interesting study, though, because I feel as if many owners seem worried about the backlash from the people who say they're not going to watch the NFL because of the protests. So you have that group on one hand. On the other hand, you have organized boycotts because of Colin Kaepernick's job status, amongst other things. Which of those two sides do you think is more of a threat to the NFL's bottom line, if either?
Wow. I think the Trump side is almost certainly probably more of a threat, because when you think about what are the big sources of income for the NFL, the real sources of income, they're PSLs, that's the private seat licenses, and it's government subsidies too, whether it's for stadiums, tax breaks, and all the rest of it. And you've already heard stories of right-wing legislatures in certain states like Louisiana speak about turning that spigot off to the National Football League, and they're doing that from the right. So the NAACP hurts the NFL from a public relations perspective and from a little bit from a sponsorship perspective. But when you're talking about like the power to actually turn off billions of dollars in public funds, people not buying PSLs, entire sponsors saying we don't want our names up at your stadium, I mean, I think that's what really concerns the owners of the NFL. But I also think, and I really do believe this, that they're going to look at polls like this and they're going to say long term, it is in the game's interest to not look like we're being pushed around by Donald Trump, and that we're standing with our players. And oh, by the way, looming over all of this is that the CBA is ending pretty soon, and they don't want to go into that with this idea of players not only manning an economic line against what the new CBA is going to be, but also a political line about their relative power or powerlessness within the sport.
Dave, I want to continue on about the owners. This was revealing from ESPN, the magazine. It was just released. One of the quotes from DeMaurice Smith said, "For the first time, the owners are afraid of the players. It has less to do with money, and it has more to do with control. The owners are used to being in control, and they aren't on this. They know it. They hate it." If you believe with DeMaurice Smith that the players do have control right now over the message, over the product, over everything, how can they maintain it?
Yeah, a couple things. One, I don't entirely agree with DeMaurice on this. As long as you have non-guaranteed contracts. And as long as Colin Kaepernick's on the outside looking in, that's the ultimate statement of what ownership control looks like. And that basic economic dynamic has not changed. I do think, though, that Damaris does make a good point that when it comes to projecting the image of the league, social media has completely changed the equation throughout sports. I mean, other than Jerry Jones, who really cares what any owner has to say about anything, frankly? I mean, do people want to know what Marshawn Lynch wants to say or what Mark Davis wants to say? And do people even know who Mark Davis is? So, yeah, when we're talking about like cultural capital, I think what this event has shown is that the balance of power has shifted dramatically. But when we're talking about capital, aka actual power, I think this is still very much in the owner's hands.
You mentioned Colin Kaepernick there. Now, some people are saying he needs to come out and say something. I think it could easily be argued that he's more powerful as a symbol per se. Do you think Kaepernick would hurt or help by saying something publicly?
I think we're at a point now where my answer is different than it would have been 7 or 8 days ago. Because I think until this recent round of protest, his silence was a powerful statement unto itself. Because what the silence said was, hey, I deserve to be playing in the National Football League. And the idea that I need to actually speak and people need to know how much I care and all the rest of it, it's almost like I would be apologizing for what I did a year ago or trying to talk my way into the league. And that's demeaning. I have no regrets about what I stood for, period. But now that things have gotten particularly hot, and knowing, as I do, how many players look to Colin Kaepernick as a leader, I think the idea of him saying something or issuing a statement would be very powerful. I contacted Colin Kaepernick, and I got him to just put his name on a signature ad campaign in support of Michael Bennett after his arrest in Las Vegas. And even that, I can tell you, I mean, I got more feedback just from his name being on that statement than anything else. You know, Jay-Z wearing his jersey on the season premiere of Saturday Night Live. So I'm not saying that he needs to do like some 2-hour sit down on 60 Minutes. I'm not saying he needs to produce some kind of manifesto, but the idea of releasing a statement, even if it just said, while I support the solidarity of everybody involved, let's please remember that these protests are about people like Tamir Rice. They're not about me, and they're not about Donald Trump. Something like that, I think, frankly, would be very powerful.
Not the easiest question to answer, but historically, how do you think we'll look back on this story and the figures involved?
I mean, the only way I can answer that question is by looking at history and looking at different political athletes throughout history and looking at the people who stood against those athletes. And history tends to treat the athlete very kindly, not in real time, but over time. They tend to look like people who were being selfless and who are using their hyper-exalted, brought to you by Nike platform to make the world a better place. And it is stunning when you look back in history and see how hated people like Muhammad Ali was, like Jackie Robinson was, how Billie Jean King lost so many endorsement contracts when her sexuality was revealed and she was outed. All of these things are part of history, and we look back at these people now like they are true heroes. And I think similarly, we will look back on this time and say, there's no way we can even talk about this era of both the Black Lives Matter movement and the Trump presidency in Charlottesville without talking about the athletes and their intervention in this struggle. And because of that, yeah, we are going to look back on them, I think, a lot more kindly than even we look back on the great athletes of the 80s and 90s who were more apolitical, but, you know, let us just kick back and watch the games. These are extraordinary times, and the athletes who are stepping up to be extraordinary people, there will be books written about them, and those books will not be unkind.
Yeah, a book that Dave Zirin wrote, A People's History of Sports in the United States, chronicled a lot of those athletes that you were just referring to. Dave Zirin, sports editor of The Nation, host of the Edge of Sports podcast. Appreciate your time. Thanks a lot, Dave.
Oh, thank you so much.
Definitely appreciate Dave Zirin. Just looking at the Facebook Live comments here as we are streaming every day on Facebook Live. David Ray says, who cares about politics, especially in sports, where Joey writes back, a lot of people do, David. A lot of people do.
Was he there for last week? I mean, here's the thing. I don't even believe it needs to be said anymore, but no one is going searching for obscure connections. These are the biggest athletes, the biggest sports leagues, the president, who are involved directly in what's going on. So the conversation was very natural, and it would have been, unprofessional for people to avoid it. And I think it was the biggest story, as Dave said, extraordinary times.
Yeah.
One of the biggest stories, if not the biggest sports story of my lifetime, and it's one that continues to unfold.
Yeah, it's also a huge story when you see these benchmarks. Like, we all came in saying, did you see the NBA preseason? And what did they do? And looking at Major League Baseball last night, seeing if anyone was going to do something. This is definitely of the now. It's of the times, as you said. That's going to do it for us, though. We're going to say goodbye until tomorrow. We'll be back with a brand new SI Now at 10:30 a.m. Eastern. Of course, you can stick to SI.com for all the latest news and headlines, and you can follow us on Twitter, where we'll be posting clips from the show right to that handle. Have a good Wednesday. See you tomorrow.
If we're picking media all-star teams, are you going to pick me?
Maybe.